is the data-driven franchise, turning local search rankings into growth playbooks. Today's webinar is available for CFE credits. If you're attending today's webinar for CFE credit, we want to welcome you this afternoon. If you're not currently an IMPG member, we'd also like to invite you for a free tour of our site and all of the features we offer. We routinely offer our members ongoing educational sessions. You can contact our membership director, Hira, for more information at hirra@ifpg.org. All lines are muted during this call. Please enter all questions and comments into the questions box, and we will address them after the presentation. If you need anything during the presentation, you can send me a direct chat. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Alex.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Alejandro Antonini from ContentMassive. And as was mentioned, today we're going to be talking about how you can leverage local search rankings into a playbook for growth across your entire network of locations for your brand. So a little bit of background about myself. I've been working in the technical side of marketing for around 20 years, supporting over 400 portfolio companies, both on the private equity and venture capital side. And in the last year alone, ContentMassive has worked with close to 5,000 franchisees. We're a very large in terms of our footprint and expansion in the content space and all we're doing across all these different networks of websites, where we've created close to 13 million pages of localized content, which is all absolutely original, equating to roughly 3 billion words of content. And our expertise lies in really Web 3.0, leveraging AI for content, video, directory management, reviews, and paid search. And that's just a listing of some of the publicly traded companies that I've supported over the years. So usually when we have conversations with brands, and most of our clients have a footprint of around 100 locations and above, but usually when we have conversations with brands, they immediately gravitate to this chart that I'm showing on the screen, where in the center of it, you have content that's on your website or specifically what you're doing. And that is followed and complemented with a foundation for promoting that content, or at least explaining what that content does. And that's usually reflected in a few tiers, which is the designs of the site, the microsites that are translating that design across an entire network, the code, which is being read by third-party networks like Google, Bing, ChatGPT, etc. And then the structured data, which really translates that and connects the dots between what's on the website and those third-party platforms. But what goes outside of that is the distribution. So there's a couple of levers to this, which is organic search, things like Google, paid search, paid ads through Google AdWords, AI search, which is the queries that you see on ChatGPT, video, YouTube, social media, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Instagram, and then directories like Yellow Pages and whatnot. So again, this is the foundation where every conversation starts when we engage with the client. And at least from their perspective, they view this as the most important. But when we initiate these conversations, what we usually gravitate to is a different component, which is the opportunity. And the opportunity, at least the way that we're looking at it, is we tend to audit these organizations and run scans across different networks, for example, Google search. And when we run these queries, we tend to uncover a lot of opportunities. And that is specifically looking at what keywords are you targeting? Where are your competitors ranking relative to that? Where do you show up relative to ranking in search results? Are you the first position, the 5th position, the 10th position, or you don't show up at all? And then taking all that into consideration and cross-referencing things like location. Now, that seems like a simple enough formula and combination, but many organizations that we deal with tend to get stuck in one component. Either they go too broad or they go too granular. And it's very hard finding a middle ground, specifically as it relates to the multi-location franchise space, because a lot of the solutions that are available on the market lean either in one direction or the other. So when we look at local search and specifically consider the national growth of a brand, you have to consider that 90% of searches, and this is based off of a 2024 study from Google, so 90% of searches for local businesses occur online. And specifically, they're not going to directories, they're not going to the yellow pages, the old school book that was available, and they're not seeing flyers on the street. They're really, their first point of interaction is going online and trying to query a location. So franchise brands really win or lose market by market. So the idea is that really when the tide rises, all boats rise. So if you have a strategy across a network, it's going to be, there's a lot of moving parts to it, but it all has to be done in symphony. So visibility varies dramatically by zip code, keyword, and device. So there's a lot of different components to this where you can't just look at performance on a national level across the whole. You have to be able to dig in a little bit deeper as well. And it goes back to the question, which is you can't really fix what you can't see. So you have to be able to identify the opportunity and make sure that it's tangible, so then you can actually action it. So there's a lot of visibility gaps, and this we come across constantly. Even mature brands that have hundreds of locations experience this one issue, which is there's really two primary channels, which is organic search and paid search, at least from a digital marketing perspective. And there has to be a relationship between what you're doing on the SEO front and what you're doing on the SEM front. Now, the reason why this is important is because you might rank very well on a local level for specific keywords. So if I'm in a city like Gloucester, Virginia, I might show up really well for a specific keyword. Assume that I'm Firestone for tire replacement, I might show up really well. But it doesn't mean that I'm going to show up well in the top 5 position of search results for all of the keyword combinations. And that's where SEM really should complement. So not necessarily allocating your budget where you're well presented, but really focusing where you're under presented. So there's a lot of fragments in the way that SEO and SEM is done. And this has to do a lot with the way that everyone is approaching the problem, the way that the agencies are being leveraged, and the resource and the time allocation to really address those concerns as well. So there's no unified view of rankings by keywords, by location that is specific to multi-location operators. So this goes into a whole combination that it's really slow time to market, and it's because it's so fragmented. Now, that issue originates from a gap existing in traditional reporting. Google is constantly changing their algorithm, and we see this across our entire networks of thousands of sites where you have to constantly be making modifications to the website in order to make sure that you're keeping up with mandates from the Google standpoint. And there's a lot of fantastic solutions that we actually use internally as well. We have APIs integrated and whatnot for solutions like SEMrush, SpyFu, Ahrefs, and whatnot. But even those solutions are constantly disrupted by changes from Google. For example, 2-3 weeks ago, Google came out with a change to their reporting, which most likely everybody saw in the Google Webmaster accounts, where no more will they show the top 100 results and all the data related to clicks and impressions that was available through that. So now they've actually limited that to the first 10 to 20 results that are available. So that significantly changes the impact and the way that everyone is perceiving the performance to market. And also, a lot of these solutions like SEMrush, SpyFlu, and Ahrefs, they're compiling the data at a national level. So it's not really a solution that is as actionable when you're thinking about a multi-location operator. And if you're looking at 100 locations, 200 locations, 300 locations, how do you digest that and how do you action that so then every individual location benefits? So this is an example of one of the reports that you would receive from SpyFlu, which is fantastic. It tells you, where your keyword is, where you started ranking, where's your end rank, but that's across the entire nation. It doesn't tell you how a new store that opened up 2 weeks ago is performing, or how the store that is the worst performing out of 200 locations, where they're ranking and where the gaps might exist with that location. So again, there's a lot of gaps with this type of reporting and the way that the data is compiled. The same is true for other solutions that are much more robust and very granular. And this is a great example where I'm sure everyone has seen these types of solutions, which is a great solution if you only have one location. And it tells you, here's a keyword, do I show up on the localized search results, and where I don't show up on localized search results. But even with a solution like this, there are still gaps that are built into the foundation and just the methodology where that data is pulled. For example, in considering this particular city, some of these pinpoints are generated by lat-long data, so latitude and longitude. And it could, for example, indicate a location that has a cornfield. So if you're running a query for one of your top keywords for an area which is lat-long defined as being in the middle of nowhere, better term, it's not a very good representation of how you're performing in the locations that have a higher population density. So again, it's all about having a balance between the different solutions. But again, the goal of this presentation is just to highlight and identify some of the opportunities that might exist. Now, we identified a lot of these issues early on with the locations that we work with, and we actually had to build our own solution to resolve for it, which is a purpose-built solution for multi-location, where if you run a query off of a long list of locations and specifically highlight one keyword, you can actually very clearly see as a representation on a visual, as a map, or as a downloadable file, how you're represented in that specific area. And you can narrow it down to, am I in the top 5 positions of search results? Am I in the top 10? You can get very granular with that information. But it's this tool was really designed to pull data in real time. So a lot of the providers, they pull this data on a monthly basis, just because of the costs associated with running these queries. And it's not the most efficient model, because when you do run that analysis, chances are you're looking 20 to 30 days behind. Again, it's a lot can change in 30 days. So just having a real-time view of that data is very important. The other thing to note is that Google doesn't really disclose a lot of this data. So they don't necessarily have a public API where they're sharing all the data from all of the queries that are occurring. They give you very high-level overviews. So what we had to do was we created a solution that runs queries in real time on Google searches down to a localized level, and that's against a specific keyword variable. Then it pulls all that information and identifies where you rank, but it does this in aggregate, so you can do hundreds, thousands of locations at a time. So the idea with the solution is really to identify the gaps and not necessarily showcase how well you're doing, but to showcase the opportunity. Now, there's a couple of different ways this could be used. For example, if, and I'll give the example of if you're a brand and you're looking to improve the performance of your local stores. And on the other instance, if you're a brand and you're looking to penetrate new markets, to easily identify how much competition exists. And with what I'm showing you on the screen, what we're able to identify very quickly, and again, this just goes into the overall strategy and creating that playbook, is identify, here's a keyword, for example, tire replacement, in a location like Concord, North Carolina. Your company happens to be Firestone, and do you show up in the top 5 positions of search results? Then the second part to that is, okay, I do or I do not. And who is showing up as the competition in that specific area? Now, that's very important because if you consider the types of campaigns that you could be running on AdWords, SEM, to penetrate a market, one of the opportunities could be to go after your competitors' traffic. So they spent a lot of time, a lot of organizations are very established in a specific location, and you can either go after the specific keyword that everyone's bidding for, and there's going to be 1,000 variables behind it to competing to that, or you can go against the actual brands that are already established and put incentivized campaigns to potentially lure some of that traffic over to your promotional offer. So again, there's a lot of different ways that you can leverage this information in terms of budget reallocation to get more coverage, or expanding your content strategy to underserved markets, and with the end goal of improving your rank, your traffic, and your overall lead generation efforts. And this just gives you a more granular look of what that solution looks like. Now, again, this is the output. Imagine that when you're generating these reports, you're doing hundreds or thousands at a time. So the opportunity is not necessarily to identify what you know, it's to identify what you don't know and make sure that there's a strategy available for that. Now, how is that resolved? So apart from generating the content, you have to be able to get down to that granular level where you're focusing on zip codes, keywords, locations, but also creating all these other mechanisms, which goes to that first slide where I mentioned this is what all the brands care about, which is the end result, but not necessarily how we get there. So if you have a clear roadmap in terms of how you're going to apply a solution in order to penetrate a market, it makes the effort and the journey a lot more pleasant, and you'll get to your goal a lot faster. And that's the difference between deploying a strategy in days relative to months, where you're fine-tuning constantly and tweaking at a granular level without understanding the bigger picture. This is just a quick overview of the way that the approach to penetrating new markets, where you've identified that there's an opportunity. You pull the data from providers like SEMrush and SpyFu and whatnot, and you identify, well, there's a high concentration of, or high volume of queries around specific keywords. Then the second part to that strategy is making sure that you have an allocation and exposure to those markets. So apart from the audit components, it really goes into really identifying those markets and having a clear plan of execution to penetrate them. This is what one of the final products looks like, where you generate thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of content. And the idea is that each one of these pages that you see, these are all sitemaps that have 1,000 pages as an example. And on the right, you're actually seeing the output where each one of these line items is an individual page. But this is content that can not only be leveraged from the perspective of SEO, but now you have a granular strategy for SEM, Google AdWords. And what's interesting is that most of the agencies that are in place, when you work with them, you're lucky if they generate 10 to 20 to 30 pages, landing pages to run campaigns against. But when you have such a granular structure with thousands and thousands of pages that are all zip code specific, keyword specific, and whatnot, you have the ability to improve your quality score and your page rank significantly. Now, centralizing the brand effort is extremely important. Identifying how you can dominate that share of voice against all of your competitors, and also optimizing your cost per lead across the board. That goes into your revenue impact and overall territory expansion opportunities. So it's really an effort where you can lift your rank by clusters and zip codes across your entire network. But we don't use this tool specifically to highlight the good. We use it as an opportunity to highlight, well, what opportunities exist. It's not about where you're showing up, it's about where you're not showing up, and having a clear strategy to be able to address that across the board. So you can see here very clearly all those items marked in red. That's where this particular client does not show up. That's the opportunity, and that's what might potentially move the needle significantly. Now, AI is learning about your brand constantly. These models are very advanced. They're constantly changing moment by moment. So what's interesting to note is that here's an example where we actually created a product for aggregating the reviews for brands. And we would basically take in, if you have 100 locations, we take the Google My Business listings from those 100 locations, create them, build structured data down to a localized level, and showcase that on the website. And what we learned from this is that not only did the AI engines learn about what we were doing and how we were structuring this data, because we structured it in such a way that these engines could actually read it and understand it, they were actually showcasing it, and they were associating it to very important terms. For example, here's an example where we show how many reviews does this company have, and here's my location. That happens to be in sunny Isles Beach, Florida. And if you look in this line over here, it says that this particular brand has a total of 1,690 reviews, and they also, and in another listing it shows 2,987. Now, 2,987 happens to be that exact number that we put on this client's website through our structured aggregate product. So the fact that we structured it in the correct way, where these AI engines could actually read that content and understand it, means that, and this happens to be the AI overview directly from Google, it just shows that the speed at which the models are learning. And we ran the same query across different providers, such as OpenAI, Grok, and whatnot, and it happened in the exact same way. Now, that was just one example with the reviews, but the same thing is happening with all the content that we're doing and all these networks and connections with this Web 3.0 strategy that's all powered with AI. And what the final result is, here's just a quick showcase of one of our customers that we started working with them 4 or 5 months ago, and they were probably showing up 10% of in 10% of the instances on specific keyword combinations. Fast forward a few months, now 91% of the time for their top markets, they're showing up for these words like acai bowls, or 82% for fruit bowls near me, 40% in healthy restaurants, 56% in healthy food near me. And look at the search volumes associated to that. So it's very easy to disrupt, to penetrate these markets if you really understand the playbook, because a lot of these keyword combinations and locations and just the way that these providers are going to market are underserved. And even the biggest brands in the world, the Dunkin' Donuts, the McDonald's, the Firestones, etc., even those providers are having a hard time adapting and moving forward with at the same rate that AI is developing. So this was an example for a restaurant chain, but the same is true for a home service provider. They were probably showing up 20–30% of the time on the top 5 rank of their specific keywords, and now they're getting much more uplift in the ranks of 70% on average across all their locations. So that's just the introduction to at least how we approach localized marketing, and using all the information that is publicly available to really guide the story and understand how to penetrate and how to optimize the brand in a very short period of time. So I think now we can go into questions.
Thank you, Alex, for that presentation.
Absolutely.
Give me 1 second. Let's just give everyone just a minute here to pop any questions in the box.
Yeah, and just to clarify, the same strategies that I outlined for the retail side of the business, where you're focusing on expanding those brands, the same strategy can be used for brand development. So in most instances, a lot of the brand strategies for bringing on new franchisees into the model, those communities are already underserved, and they're experiencing the same issues in terms of penetrating the market as what we mentioned on the retail front. So the same opportunity exists across both models. And what we can do is we can leave the conversation open for any questions. So if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to either directly to us or the presenter, and we're more than happy to dive into any additional questions that you might have, or anything along those lines.
Yes, thank you, Alex. And can you remind everyone on where they can reach back out to you?
Absolutely, yes. So you could find us at ContentMassive.com. ContentMassive.com. So you go directly to Google, or feel free to reach out to the team from IFPG, and they're most likely happy to introduce us.
Absolutely, thank you. Do you have any closing comments that you would like to add, Alex?
I guess the only closing comment is that there's a ton of opportunity no matter where you look, specifically with leveraging AI solutions, but there's also a lot of noise in the market. So even though fundamentally there's a lot of complexity with the way that these solutions are presenting themselves, and they seem to be generally addressing a lot of concerns, the models for the way that SEO and SEM works hasn't changed in 20 years, for the most part. Now you can just do it a little bit faster, a little bit more optimized, or a lot more optimized, but the models are the same. So, you know, all of that thinking, all of that experience that you've acquired over a lifetime of working in the franchising space is still applicable today. That isn't going to be changing anytime soon. Google still accounts for 88% of all search queries that are happening online. So again, it's an industry which is ripe for disruption, but it's going to take a while. So again, tools like this and solutions that I just presented make things a little bit easier, but it's always good to understand that a lot of the models that have worked over the years still apply today.
Thank you again, Alex, for that presentation, and to all attendees. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Thanks, everyone.